Hello and welcome to this class. Let's jump into this game. It was played back in 2018 and it was a 5-minute game. This is important to remember as we'll see some inaccuracies for both sides. But yeah, let's jump into the game. So White started with the move E4. It's the most common move. And of course, it's a good idea to fight for the center squares. We're fighting for the center. And at the same time, we're letting our bishop out. Right at the start of the game, he's stuck. And now we are opening a window for him. Okay, that makes sense. If White had a free turn, we would love to park 2 pawns in the center of the chessboard. And with that, we would conquer the entire center of the board and would have a lot of space. So Black is advised to stop our pawn duo, our 2 pawns in the center. And the most reliable ways for Black to do that are to simply guard the square where we want to put our pawn. And the 2 ways to do that are either to play E5, and that would be guarding the square that we would like to go to, or to play C5, the move that was played in this game. Of course, the move of Knight C6 seems to be guarding that square, but since the queen would be protecting it, you wouldn't actually want to capture that pawn. The knight is worth more than this pawn duo. So let's go back, and again, let's take a look at the move that was played in the game, which is pawn to C5, the so-called Sicilian defense. Black is defending the center with a slightly not center pawn. And this scores really well for Black. Although, of course, E5, also a good choice. White usually wants to castle. So he needs to get his bishop and his knight out of the way. And so in the game, he prepares to do so by getting his knight out. And of course, the knight heads to the center, because from there, it will be doing the most amount of work it can do. Okay, and of course, there's now one less piece in between the king and the rook, so that's why he played knight to f3. Black can play the Sicilian in many different ways. You can play pawn to d6, you can play pawn to g6, right? A lot of moves. You could play knight c6, or in the game they played the move e6. And of course, this is a nice move because it unleashes the scope of that bishop, and it prepares maybe to play the move d5, and we'd get a nice pawn chain that is directed towards our e4 pawn. It's a good move and a very common move. Okay, now in the game, White decided, probably because it's a 5-minute game, that he didn't want to play the main move. And the main move is to play the move pawn to d4. And this would be the most common and perhaps best move for White to play. And the reason for this possibly being the best move is that some people will say that White has the lead in development because he has one knight already developed. Also, look at that scope of the bishop is pretty nice. So a lot of squares, whereas their bishop's a little bit inhibited, it's a little bit blocked. So perhaps White has this lead in development. And one of the ideas in chess is if you have more pieces developed than your opponent, you would like to trade the pawns to open the position. And supposedly that will be better for the side with more pieces that are ready to go, more pieces that are off the starting squares, which is what White has already done. On his first move, with e4, we are getting this bishop opened. Whereas when Black chooses to play c5, it's true he gets his his queen slightly out, but probably wouldn't want to bring the queen out anyway. So it's not really a developing move. And kind of to top it off, Black started to turn behind. So therefore, after knight f3, developing move, Black prepares to develop his bishop perhaps. So it makes sense if we have more development to maybe play d4 and open the position. Of course, the game is still relatively equal, but maybe an equality where white is slightly better. All right, let's get back to the game. In this game, again, probably because it's a 5-minute game, white decided to play a slightly offbeat idea, which is to play the move pawn to g3. Of course, it's been played before, but not really considered a very testing idea for white to play. Which is fine because, again, this is a 5-minute game, and sometimes the practical, the fact it's a little bit more unexplored position will trump the fact that it might not be the best move. And again, when white plays the best move, when white usually plays, and of course, when white plays a second-rate move, such as this g3 move, it usually means the game is equal. White started with the first turn, with some small advantage perhaps, and if he plays a second-rate move somewhere in the opening, probably the game will be still about equal. It's okay, g3 is a solid move. The idea is to get that bishop in the middle of this little triangle, and for that reason, or why you'd want to do that is because now the bishop will be on the longest light square diagonal on the chessboard. So hopefully that bishop will be quite strong. The downside of playing g3, of course, is that your bishop already had some opportunities to develop. So now you're developing your bishop in like a slower fashion. Okay. In the game, they played g3. Black played knight c6. Good move. Developing his pieces towards the center is never a bad idea. We followed up with bishop g2. That's why we played pawn g3. And now, hey, we're almost ready to castle. Not too bad. Black plays knight to f6 with the obvious threat. Can anyone actually see what the obvious threat is? Yes, of course, our pawn is now under attack. So probably we would like to save that pawn. How would you save the pawn? Yeah, we have quite a few options. We could play knight to c3, we could play queen to e2, we could play pawn d3, we could move the knight out of the way to protect this pawn. But out of all these ways, probably only knight c3 and pawn d3 would really make much sense. If you play queen e2, your queen is coming out like a little bit too early, something that most people are advised not to do. And then, of course, moving your knight again doesn't make sense. You don't want to move the same piece twice in the game. Whereas notice, if you move the knight out, hey, that's moving a piece that is not doing anything. And same thing if I move the pawn to d3. Right, okay, I'm protecting the pawn, but I'm also, maybe getting that bishop out at some point. So it's sort of a developing move to play pawn d3. Okay, in the game they play knight c3, simply protecting the pawn with the knight. And black played pawn to d6. Probably not the most ambitious option, but definitely a solid option. He's getting ready to move for bishop d7, and his pawns are quite solid. There's no weaknesses in in black's pawn structure. They're all very solid pawns. Perhaps though, maybe going for d5 was a bit more principled idea of fighting for the center, putting a pawn in the center to oppose white's pawn, who is, controlling the center unopposed. So perhaps d5 was a slightly better choice. Of course, d6 is like the second most popular choice here, so it can't be a mistake. Again, white should probably open the position by playing pawn to d4. Trading the pawns is what we mean by opening the position, and by playing d4, you're setting up a pawn trade. Either they'll trade with you, you'll take back your knight, or you'll take them if they don't do anything. That would open the position, and you would like to do that because, again, you still have this lead in development, 3 versus 2. So It wouldn't win the game by any means to open the position, but it's sort of like the principled option when you have a lead in development. Okay, but anyway, in the game, white castled. Not a bad move, of course. Black said, that's a great idea. Let me try to achieve the same idea. If we go back a second, we notice that they still can't castle because their bishop's in the way. So by playing bishop e7, they are getting ready to castle. White finally went for the principled move, which is to play d4. Okay. And black more or less will always take our pawn. This is one of the ideas of the entire opening. When we play e4, as we already talked about, we're going for this pawn duo. And when black plays c5, he is, trying to shut down our pawn duo idea. So even though we played this d4 move, 6 moves, 7 moves later, whatever, in the game, black's idea is still going to be the same. He's going to take his slightly not centered pawn, as flank pawn, and he's going to destroy our center pawn. On the other hand, white is ahead in development, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versus 3. So white is happy to open the position, trade a pawn, and activate that knight. Look at the knight is now beautifully placed in the center of the chessboard. Okay, so both sides are happy. Black wiped out our center pawn, but our pieces are quite active for the white side. All right, black played bishop d7. Obviously, could have castled as well, but bishop d7 is a nice developing move. Notice that black's position it's a little bit cramped, right? White has more space. If we divide the board into 2 sides, this is the white side, and this is the black side. We notice that all of the black pieces are still kind of bunched up on the first 1, 2, 3 rows in their camp. They have nothing on this kind of 4th row from their perspective. And white has pieces that are already poking into black's territory. So white has a little bit extra space. But to be fair, black has a very solid position. Everything's connected with each other. Everything is just really boxed in, connected. Very hard for black to lose any material in such a compact and maybe safe position. All right, white played pawn to b3. It's this whole fianchettoing idea, again, is putting the bishop in the middle of the triangle. Let's see, we have another little triangle over here. And whenever you do that, the whole idea is hopefully this bishop will be on its longest diagonal. Right? We go there on bishop b2. That's a very long dark square diagonal, just like this bishop's diagonal is really long, this light squared diagonal, like this. So that's why he played pawn b3. Black decided castle. Good idea. We played bishop b2. We already talked about how this bishop is now on a very long diagonal. Hopefully that was worth it, because we did spend kind of 2 turns to put our bishop out when he had already had the chance to develop it in 1 turn. Maybe here or something. Right. So if we go back, just a second. Just go back. Here, we have the ability to develop our bishop in 1 turn. But this diagonal that it's on is a little bit smaller than that sort of dream diagonal we just were talking about. The benefit is, boom, it's already developed. Whereas when you play pawn to b3, you're kind of hoping that this bishop will be very strong at the end, but in the moment, you spent a move not developing your bishop. So it's a bit of a trade for quality, for speed of development. So hopefully this will be worth it for white. Black castles was already talked about. We put our bishop there. And now black played the move pawn to a6. Why do you think black played pawn to a6? Take a second to think about it. Yeah, so there's maybe a couple reasons to play pawn to a6. The first reason is often when you push a pawn on the side, you're trying to stop the opponent from putting some sort of piece there. Maybe one of these knights could come to b5 and start hitting the weak d6 pawn. So see how that pawn is weak. And the reason it's weak is it has no black pawns to protect it. So it's a little bit of a sore spot in black's position. Although it's not like it's gonna be lost or something. Black could easily add more bodyguards like this, or you can move the bishop out of the way, but it still may be a target. And black is simply, or one idea for black to play a6 is to simply stop the possibility of that pawn being poked in the first place. And the second point for playing a6 is maybe we can expand on the queen side of the chessboard and get a little bit of space over there. Who knows what we'll do with that space, but it might be nice to have that little bit of a space advantage over there. So that's two reasons why black played a6. Okay. Now, white played knight c to e2. The reason for this move is white would like to make a Maroczy bind by playing c4. And the Maroczy bind is basically these pawns on c4 and e4, both creating a bit of a space advantage. They're really going to bind down on the d5 square. Let's try to draw arrows properly. There we go. And it will try to make it hard for black to like say expand in the center to fight back against white's space advantage. Very slow way to play the position. We're not going for kingside checkmates. We're not like throwing the stuff over there. We're just preparing to support the center with another pawn. See, the pawn he won't be in the center, but he'll be attacking a center square. So it's a very solid way to play the position. Black played rook c8. Notice that he never moved that rook. And now the rook is, he's on a semi-open file. He's on a line where there's no black pawn to block his path. If you go back a second, he's not doing much because he's blocked by his own pawn. So rook c8 activates the rook. Pawn c4, we already talked about how that will put a little bit of an extra defender in the center. Okay, and now black needs to, black has developed all his pieces, and so now black needs to do something about white's superior space advantage. Right, white's on the 4th rank from their perspective, and black is only on the 3rd rank from his perspective. So what to do for black? I would say that this is the first move of the game where we see that these players are very strong players. I think a lot of beginners could definitely get to this part where we all just were developing our pieces off the starting squares. But now from here on out, I would say this is where the game goes from, most people play this way to, I don't think very many non-grandmasters could play this way. So yeah, let's try to understand what they're doing. In the game, they played b5. Looks like a terrible move. If you're a beginner, if you're starting out, b5 looks just, a blunder, right? It's protected 1 time, and obviously it seems to be attacked 2 times. Maybe black is a terrible chess player. And of course, this is far from the truth. Black is a very strong chess player, and his pawn is actually protected. And is protected by a little trick of, if we notice, this bishop is aiming at that pawn. And if it wasn't blocked by the knight, it would actually be protecting this pawn. So when we take that pawn, before they take it back, because then you just take the pawn, they're going to discovered attack the b5 square by simply moving their knight out of the way. So they need to move the knight out of the way while capturing something, so we don't have time to take the next pawn. So they take on d4, the only capture they could have done. Of course, we need to take it back, so we take it back. And now when they take this, you see that their bishop was unblocked by that knight, and now that bishop is protecting their pawn. So kind of in a very creative way, Black was able to eliminate one of our defenders in the center. Right, we had these two nice little pawns. Now we have only one. So I think Black made some little headway there. Position is still very equal. Okay, White played queen to e2. Very reasonable move. It simply connects the rooks together. So that makes sense. We had never used the queen before. Now we're using the queen. And of course, we're keeping an eye on the center along with the bishop. Maybe we're eyeing the b pawn, but mostly it was just about connecting these rooks and nothing too amazing after that. Okay, Black said that looks like a great idea, connecting these rooks. Let me copy you and connect my rooks as well. So that's why he played queen b6, to connecting the rooks. Okay. Now, White played rook f to d1. It's sort of common that these two rooks will go somewhere towards the center. Maybe here, it's not quite in the center, but it's close enough. Or maybe we could have gone to E, the center, and to D in the center. In this game, he decided to go rook f d1, which is definitely more centered, and it makes sense to put your rooks on lines where there are less pawns, because the pawns often, so if we had gone here, kind of are blocked by these pawns over here. That would be called a closed file. So by going rook d1, there's only one pawn over here. You might say there's a knight can move out of the way. Whereas the pawn, you can't really move like sideways out of the way, so it'd be a little bit harder to get this rook doing something with this pawn in the way. So rook f d1, that makes sense. The rook wasn't doing too much over here. It was guarding this pawn. No one's attacking the pawn at the moment. So rook f d1 makes some sense. It doesn't create any direct threats, but it's nice just sort of in the center. Black played pawn b4, and now we see that Black has actually achieved something in the last couple turns. Before he was bunched up on these first three ranks, and now he's actually in our territory. Right? He's in the White's territory. His pawn is cramping our space, so therefore Black has a space advantage on that side of the chessboard, on the queen side of the chessboard. Of course, we still have a bit of a space advantage in the center. The game is probably still balanced, roughly equal. Black, okay, so here, I think White played the first, I don't want to call it mistake of the game, but maybe slight inaccuracy. Again, this is a 5-minute speed chess game, what they call a Blitz game. So it's understandable that players are going to start making mistakes as their timer gets down, and down. And it becomes a little bit of a speed battle more than a chess match. Anyway, probably the move e5 wasn't the best move because, well, like we were saying, this pawn is providing a space advantage. And when we get it traded off, it doesn't provide a space advantage. Of course, the advantage of this is that now the rook is a bit more opened. The queen is obviously in a better spot, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that was worth it. That pawn was a very nice, stable space advantage in the center. Okay, anyway, still roughly equal position. Here we're being driven back. It'd be quite embarrassing to go straight back, right? To go back into our territory. So White tries to stay within the Black's territory, like this. The queen is still in the territory, and it's even keeping an eye on the king. There's some pieces aiming at the black king. Black simply takes care of this very easily by asking the queen to just get out of my base, okay? And we have to. There's no safe square in black's camp to really stay there. Everything is protected. I'll take a look at all these squares, bishop, queen. Okay, so sadly we are evicted, so let's get out of here. So we played queen d2, and this was White's kind of mistake of the game, White's second mistake of the game. And here, it does seem that after bishop c5, that perhaps White is actually in a little bit of trouble. By going queen to d1, the queen might not be on the correct line. And it's actually a bit hard to see how we are not going to lose material. So for example, if I move the knight out of the way, or actually let's make a developing move. Let's say I put the rook in the middle. Now this pin and the fact that this rook could come here, let's put the rook here. So let's see, all of this is sort of, I don't know, somehow hard to get out of. Let's say if we move the knight out of the way, now they simply hop in with their knight, and again, we're going to lose material here. Let's say we move the queen to safety, of course, and now our king side starts falling apart, right? With this queen and bishop battery pointing at us, this would be a disaster. And that's all kind of due to the fact that the queen jumped onto the square that was just a bit too easy to harass, right? The knight can sometimes jump there. The rook is sort of sometimes going to hit you over here, kind of eye your queen over there. And perhaps the right move for the white queen was here. It's not able to be hit with this rook, and this tempo isn't that important because it's just you just easily dodge it with your own counterattack on the knight. So probably this is just a mistake to play queen to d2. Luckily, black didn't punish white for this inaccuracy. Again, because it's a blitz game, 5 minutes, there's really no time to think. And instead, he plays bishop to e5, which is a good move. So just don't get me wrong, it's not a mistake or anything, but he really misses out on this idea to really punish the f2 square. We saw that knight can sometimes come in and join that battle, and maybe that's a kind of the negative of putting a rook on d1. You're no longer protecting the f2 square. So it's a blitz game. White made some mistakes. Black made his own mistake. Okay, that's fair. Therefore, position is still roughly equal, even after all that. Okay, he played rook to e1. The obvious idea is I'm going to take your bishop if you don't do anything about it. Save the bishop. It's easy enough. And now white played knight to c2 with the very obvious threat that we can maybe take this pawn. It's attacked twice and it's only protected one time. And now for whatever reason, black, maybe he didn't find a way to save the pawn, or maybe he was, probably most likely, he was trying to sacrifice the pawn for some sort of initiative, some sort of, it's actually a little bit unclear what he was trying to do, but in any regard, it doesn't work. This is where white goes, or this is where the game goes from roughly equal to white is, just simply winning. And that is here, black did not find a good way to save his pawn. Perhaps take a second here and think about how would you try to save your pawn? It's attacked twice, protected only one time. Yeah, and that's right. It's not easy to see how you'd protect the pawn. Of course, we could try to sacrifice our rook. That would take the attackers off the pawn, but probably not the best idea. Because okay, you saved the pawn, but you lost a $5 rook for only a $3 knight. Doesn't really work out probably. And barring that, you might be going, well, I guess I could put the bishop to protect this guy, right? And yes, you would protect the pawn, but now your house would be completely destroyed with bishop takes f6. And in case you gotta take it back. And now you can see that there's a giant hole in the black's king side. Probably not a good position for black. So black seems to be in a bit of trouble here. He seems to be having a problem with this pawn. And he also maybe is going to have a problem with his king side. So that's a bit debatable. Because we would lose a bishop, which is worth more than the knight, for that damage against the king. So it's a bit of a pluses, ups and downs for that idea. Probably black should have played bishop to a7. This way, if we take on b4, they can create their own counterattack on our weak f2 pawn. And I don't see how we'd actually protect against this threat for very long. For instance, if you put a rook to protect this, I guess here they could probably just drive your rook away. And now your rook will move, and then they'll just take on the f2 square. And same story, if you put your rook here to protect it, they still have bishop b5, and now your rook is going to have to move, and then they'll just take on f2. So we are in a little bit of trouble. And by a little bit of trouble, I mean we're just lost. So that would protect the pawn in a very creative way. This bishop a7 kind of dynamically protecting the pawn because of our counterplay potential on the f2 square. And so if they play it, of course, we can guard this diagonal by putting the knight in the way. But now the knight is not participating in the attack on the b pawn, and the pawn will live. The game will go on. Maybe someone else, maybe down the road someone will lose or win, but at least the game will be roughly equal still. Sadly, black did not find, admittedly, the tricky bishop a7 move. It doesn't really come to one right away to see such a move. And instead, black played rook f to d8. Good centralizing move, of course. The rook on f8 was doing, I don't know, protecting his pawn from nothing. So it makes sense that he developed the rook, but sadly, he just goes down a pawn. And even though we're only on move 23, white has two passed pawns. We'll make a couple moves. We'll see that they trade the queens. And now we can just see that white has these two pawns that are unblocked by any enemy pawns. And therefore, one of these two pawns is probably going to make a touchdown, make a queen in a very long amount of time. And black's going to have to probably sacrifice a piece to stop with the pawn from becoming a queen, and then he'll just be down a piece, and it'll just kind of domino to just a lost endgame. Because these two players are extremely strong players, 2,600 plus, that's going to take a long time to convert, this like one extra pawn advantage. So the next 60 some odd moves are just white bringing this advantage home. And that definitely goes outside the scope of a pure beginner class, but I will just quickly show you, how these pawns are just pushing up. There's a lot of Grandmaster technique here, far beyond what we need to understand, but we just see that these two pawns, first of all, we're trading down. All these trades are beneficial for white because he has extra material in the endgame, more stuff that we trade, the less chance black could trick us. And you notice these pawns are getting a little bit closer every couple turns here. So let's keep pressing forward. So now we've sort of traded off to just one pawn, and there it goes. It gets a little bit closer to touchdown. And I mean, it's a really slow victory for white, but it's more or less just a done deal for players of this level. If you're not a super grandmaster, you could definitely mess up, you know, your only one outside pass pawn advantage. But for players at this level, not really. The kings activate. Notice that the kings have come out of their shelters because we are now in the endgame. There's not a lot of pieces to fight for the kings, so now they need to step up and try to participate in this game instead of just cowering in a corner. So there we go. Both the kings are being activated. And unfortunately, black just doesn't have the army size. And so you see that pawn is marching up to a6. It's getting a little bit close to touchdown. To be fair, white did not technically find the best way to bring this game home. But for a 5-minute game, remember, they're on move 47, and they had only 5 minutes per each side for the entire game. So we're going to cut white a little bit of slack. And yeah, he didn't convert the game perfectly. There's some technical draws that black could play that are very computer-esque. It would be absolutely ridiculous if black were able to find these perfect defensive resources and held the game. For all practical purposes, white is just winning the game. And that's exactly what happened in this game. So yes, we did lose our outside pass pawn over here, but we just basically switched it with this pawn over here. Now this one is a pass pawn. So basically just switching one advantage to another, and it's still just pushing these extra pawns forward. This is a nice little pin. So you cannot take the pawn because I'll take your king, and therefore we're going to get another pawn. There you go. We're up another pawn. So now we've sort of did trade this one pawn that we had over here for 2 extra pawns. These cancel out on the king side. So it's just a very slow professional conversion. Again, yes, white didn't convert it perfectly, but again, you know, black would have had to basically be cheating to hold the position. And now at this point, there's just nothing to do. There's some little spite checks, you know, like, hey, maybe we want to draw. And obviously white's going to say, no, I don't want to draw. I'm winning the game. So let's just slowly push these pawns forward. It's 61 moves now. We reached the winning position almost, 30 moves ago now? And this is just how long it takes at this level where black is extremely strong to convert, to bring home, you know, only a pawn advantage. But it basically is a done deal. There's some more checks, some more maneuvering, stopping the checks with the rook. And then eventually we're going to get these pawns rolling. There we go. We're getting it rolling. Some more little checks that we have to dodge. No big deal. They're threatening a pawn, protect the pawn. And now we just have these 2 extra pawns. Still going to take 20-something moves to bring this home. Let's quickly brush past it. Some little checks. We got to kind of navigate out of these checks. The exact details of which are very grandmasterly. So let's not concern ourselves too much with this. But just the fact that if you win a pawn or 2, it's just a winning position, right? And there we go. These pawns are rolling up the board ever so slowly, step by step, step by step. Here we go. And now we are threatening one move checkmate. In a lot of games, grandmasters would, I mean, they obviously know they've been losing for a while, so they would have resigned a while ago. But for the fact that it's a 5-minute game, maybe white will make a crazy mistake. Maybe white will do a silly stalemate despite his strength. He's got seconds on the clock, probably. And anyway, for that reason, black decided not to resign. And also, at this point, he does see the 1-move checkmate coming, and he decides to allow white to play it, which I think is a courteous thing. I think if you force your opponent to play 95 moves in a position you know you're losing, let the checkmate happen. You know, just be a nice guy. That's exactly what Black did. He wasn't stunned at the checkmate that happened on the board. Obviously, he knew it was going to come up. So really, it was about 25 moves of chess for our beginner class. White eventually won a single pawn, and it took 60 some odd moves to bring it home to victory. But that's exactly how these top grandmaster games go. Okay, they're not Magnus level top grandmasters, but they're very strong grandmasters, ridiculously strong. And a lot of their strength really is in that endgame conversion technique. Non-super grandmasters easily mess up a 1 pawn plus advantage. Super easy to mess it up. Here, White brought it home. Moral of the story, Blitz is hard, chess is hard, and don't lose your pawns. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you guys in the next class.